So, I gotta be honest, I'm not entirely up on Disney stuff. I haven't seen a Disney movie since, well, if Deadpool 2 doesn't count as Disney, well, then probably like the late 90s or so. When was Aladdin released again? Anywho, I've also never been to Disneyland/World, and honestly, I don't really care to go either. Not my thing. So when I picked up the Haunted Mansion on PS2 over 3 years ago, intending to play it for an October review and expecting a crap cash-in, I kinda slacked and never got around to playing it. Not until this month, where I finally took it off the shelf, dusted it off, and popped it into the PS2. Oh, wait. The case says there's a free movie pass inside? Oh, sweet! It's still in here! Wonder if I can still cash this in. The first thing I noticed was the game was published by TDK. I didn't even know they published games. I only knew them as a sort of tape cassette company. And other than maybe Conan, I've never heard of any of these other games. Wait, what's this? They were bought by Take-Two? Well, that's interesting. Anywho, back to the game. The second thing I've noticed is that I really had to crank up the volume in order to hear any of the voices. And even then, the volume is so low I could barely understand any of it. And it's not just in this opening intro either. Literally every voice volume in the game is set to -5, with the music and other sounds at 10. It got to the point after an hour or two where I just gave up trying to pay attention. What I did gather out of the story is that you play as Zeke, a new caretaker for the famous Haunted Mansion. He meets with a few ghosts, faints, and when he comes to, is told by a Madame Leota, who is trapped in a crystal ball because of course she is, that there are souls trapped in the mansion. The souls are being held captive by an evil man known as Atticus Thorne, who is attempting to take over both the world of the living and not quite so living. Zeke is tasked with freeing all of the souls and taking out Atticus Thorne. All of this is told to you in the first scene of the game, and in a very lengthy monologue by Madame Leota. It's really a shame that the volume is so low, because I wouldn't have minded at least attempting to be interested in the story. At least there are captions when Leota speaks, but if you interact with any of the souls that you free, no such luxury is given. So with all of this said, you can rightfully assume that Zeke will need to fight off hostile ghosts and other creepy crawlies. How does he do this? By using a magical lantern, of course. Zeke uses it like a firearm, shooting off magical blasts by pressing the R1 button. With infinite ammo, you can just keep smashing R1 to fire off projectiles as rapidly as you can press the button. Eventually, by defeating bosses, you'll earn soul gems. And no, not like Elder Scrolls soul gems. These soul gems upgrade the abilities of the magical lantern. First, you'll get a charge shot that stuns most enemies and does hefty damage, and then an area attack that isn't as useful as you might imagine. The next soul gems will simply power up your standard, then charged, then area attack, in that order. These upgrades will come simply by progressing in the game, so they aren't necessarily something that you can find early on to make later segments easier. The meat of the game is freeing souls. So how do you do this? Zeke enters every room in the mansion, in a somewhat specific order, to clear the threats and collect the souls. Most doors require a specific amount of souls to enter, bearing striking resemblance to the Star Doors in Mario 64. When entering a room, you'll see that typically it's as dark as can be. The goal is to illuminate that room, be it by lighting torches, finding the light switch, or any other way of getting brightness in there. This isn't exactly easy, as each room has a different puzzle for you to solve, and they are often based on the room that you're in. In the game room, you're shrunken down and warped onto a pool table, and you need to avoid the cue ball while all of the other balls get punched into a pocket. In the study, you'll need step-on switches to move around floating bookshelves so that you can clamber up onto them and reach the light switch. The Mage Chambers have shifting walls that force you to navigate a twisting sort of maze to get to the end. Each room is thoughtfully done, and it's one of the main reasons why I continued playing. I wanted to see what the next room had in store for me. After turning on the lights, you're not done in that room. You need to find the souls. They are hidden in objects in the room, like vases, bookcases, paintings, stuff like that. I tended to just look around for pulsing objects, which is the tell that it houses souls. Or you can do what I ended up doing late game and just repeatedly press square until the souls were freed where I currently was. Once they get set loose, you have to get near them and hold down the circle button. You can also press the circle button multiple times and then hold it to suck in multiple souls at a time, kind of like a Ghostbusters trap. Once you find all of the souls, you can consider the room complete. If you're not sure how many are left, don't worry. The gauge in the bottom left of the HUD to the right of the lantern tells you how many souls are left in that room. One catch to clearing these puzzles is that Zeke has some really loose controls. This is especially critical during the platforming segments. One of the earlier puzzles, in the conservatory, forces Zeke to leap onto trails of flying books. The path is extremely narrow and it's way too easy to fall off, especially since the lantern doesn't give much light. You can fire off shots to make the path a bit brighter for a split second, but it still doesn't entirely help. I really wanted to quit here, as I started to get more and more frustrated, but I'm glad I didn't, as there was still quite a bit of game in store for me. The loose controls aren't limited to just the jumping around. The targeting during combat can feel kinda quirky. Infinite shots is fun and all, but trying to aim at a specific enemy can be a bit trying. Holding L1 allows Zeke to lock onto the nearest threat, while you can use the right analog stick to swap enemies. The lock-on didn't seem to work the best, as I occasionally attempted to aim at one enemy for the lock-on to snap the camera to a different enemy that seemed like less of a threat. Not to mention a lot of the enemies will strike you and not let go. I'm looking at you, you stupid ghosts. The little spiders aren't too bad. The big ones attempt to latch onto you using their web and pull you towards them, and one of the puzzles requires you to utilize this. The sirens always confuse me, as I never understood how it took damage at some points of its scream, but not others. And the Knights and Reapers are annoying just due to how fast they can be. The good thing about the combat is that it's not too difficult. There are plenty of health items around the mansion, although they don't exactly heal a ton of life. There are maximum life increases in hidden areas, and one thing I should also mention is that when the lights for the room you are in are turned on, your max life meter is increased a little bit. But it does shrink back down when entering a dark room again. Enemies can still pop out when searching for the souls in illuminated rooms, so that extra bit of life can be useful. In addition, lives are somewhat plentiful. You can locate fortune cards, and 10 of these grants an extra life. If you do die, no big deal, you just respawn exactly where you fell, with the only penalty being a lost life. If you have serious issues clearing a room and lose a ton of lives, don't feel bad reloading a game. You can save at the grandfather clocks located at a few places in the hallways, so it's a good idea to save after every room or two. I never got a game over and cleared the game with well over 10 lives, so it's not exactly the most difficult game on the system. And although I won't go into specific details, just know that the final boss is actually ridiculously easy. In fact, most times that you encounter Thorn, which is about 4 or so, his patterns are so predictable that it's kinda hard to lose. The final encounter I did go through a few lives due to what seemed like an unblockable attack, but as long as you have the lives, you can brute force through the battle. One of the best parts of the game is the atmosphere. You can tell what you're getting into right from the start, where you view the loading screens. That's right, the loading screens. They start off as normal paintings, but as it gets closer to loading the room, it starts to morph into something a bit more hideous. I love this kind of stuff. The remainder of the game continues giving off that spooky environmental look, opting not to go for jump scares, but instead just that creepy feeling like you're being watched or something. Granted, the game is incredibly dark most of the time, so trying to see some of the threats isn't the easiest task, and you often might be relying on sound in order to hear them coming. But overall, the developers did a really good job at taking the famous property and giving it a proper setting in the game. I was actually really surprised with the Haunted Mansion, as I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sure, it has its frustrating moments, and the voice volume should really have been overhauled or subtitles allowed on all conversations, but it was really fun to navigate the mansion, solving the different puzzles in each room. I expected popping the game in and being bored to tears with it, thinking it was going to be that cheap cash-in I mentioned at the start, but it was anything but. The developers, High Voltage, put some serious thought into the game and did a great job giving us something that was better than it probably had any right to be. I picked up my copy, completed in the box for about $7. So if you have a working PS2 and are a Disney fan, or a fan of puzzle games with a hint of light combat, the Haunted Mansion could be a fun game to tackle for a few hours. Final score? 5 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.